Brazil.
Welcome to The Radical Bureaucrat, a podcast for people who want to change institutions from the inside.
We're Rusty, Abram. Today is Wednesday, March 3rd, 2021. And Abram, it's been a long time since we did this.
Yeah, it's been a while, almost a year, in fact. We're back to discuss the recent news in New York City that Chancellor Richard Carranza is leaving the New York City school system and will be replaced by Misha Ross Porter. And this is huge news with lots and lots of implications that we'll get into in a second. But before we do, let's just quickly give new listeners a chance to orient themselves to the podcast.
Right. So here are a few basic things listeners should know. I'm Sam. My podcast partner is Abram. And we both work in central offices for the New York City school system. We haven't taped since last March, April, and May when we recorded 20 episodes in quick succession about life and justice at the beginning of the pandemic. I was just listening to some of those episodes in preparation for our comeback, Abram, and it's really interesting to hear what we thought on March 16th and how that thinking evolved through the season. I'll tell you one thing, we never anticipated that we would be working from home a year later.
That's right. Yeah. And here we are. You know, we've made so many adjustments to this new normal, and I've got my air quotes on for our listeners. And it really has us thinking so critically about the old normal and all of the calls to go back to normal, a general feeling that maybe things will never really be the same as they were before. And so with all that in mind, we've got two, and I really, really can't emphasize this enough, two really incredible guests joining us to really help make sense of the current transition, the context in New York City, the nation's largest public education bureaucracy at the very top, the chancellorship. And so before we get to them, I just have one question for you, Sam. It's been less than a week since Chancellor Carranza announced that he was stepping down. And people may want to know, is it too soon for us to assess impact? I mean, certainly we're not going to talk about legacy necessarily, but I mean, isn't he still chancellor for a few more weeks?
Yeah, he is. He gave his 2-week notice, though, and so I think it is good time to talk about it. And here's why. First is he undoubtedly has created some space for action, which we'll get into, and it's important to recognize those spaces and those opportunities. The second thing is, I think too often, and I really feel this from like the bottom of my heart, we tear our leaders down, but we don't acknowledge their strengths. And I'm not here to lionize Chancellor Carranza, right? He's just a person, but I do want to give him his due. And I think that when people step out, especially in the name of justice, it's important to do that. And third, if we don't tell the story of his chancellorship, other people will. And so it's important that we record our thoughts, that the story of his time here isn't defined only by those who would oppose any challenge to the status quo, only by his enemies, really. Let's make sure that our thoughts are part of the record.
Yeah, we all know what Zora Neale Hurston taught us, which is that if we don't learn to tell our own story, then they'll kill us and say that we liked it, right? And so the stories that we tell ourselves about transitions like this shape our understanding of the opportunities and the threats presented. And they teach us how not to be fooled out of our freedom by anyone with power. The stories that we record on the podcast are about understanding our places vis-a-vis these institutions and systems, and how we can disrupt and transform the public trust that our communities will need us to build in this different future together. I can't imagine anyone better to help us think through this landscape than the two incredible guests we have, both of whom are leaders in their own right for social justice, warriors in the proud tradition of Black and Brown ancestors, steeped in the brilliance of those traditions, and a life living and organizing for justice inside and outside of our school system here in New York.
Yeah, in fact, both of them are people who I look up to and admire for their leadership and willingness to speak truth to power.
Yeah, and that, we're not saying that because we're just happy to have you on the podcast. We really mean that. We both feel lucky that you guys are here with us.
Absolutely.
I think maybe the best way to introduce them is to maybe briefly read that great source of identity formation, the Twitter bio. And so the first guest is Sadye Campoamor. And Sadye is a great friend, and really a sister to me in so many
They're
ways.
laughing, by the way.
Really
You can't hear
appreciate
them, but
her.
they're muted, listeners. We gotta laugh out of that one.
You guys could unmute and laugh. We like laughter on the podcast. Sadye describes herself on Twitter as a lover and a fighter, an anti-racist mama, a wife, friend, organizer, and lifelong learner. Proud NYC public school grad and community affairs for the NYC DOE. And she gave the Black Power fist there. Right up. Guest 2 is Zakiyah Ansari, who tweets as a Black Muslim mom of 8, advocacy director for AQE, the Alliance for Quality Education, New York, great organization, working with parents, youth, and communities of color to transform their public schools. #Education for Liberation. Don't sleep on that hashtag. Sadye and Zakiyah, we're so honored to have you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
This is very full circle for us because Zakiyah and I have been working together since 2010.
Wow.
She's been probably working on this longer than that, but I came into the education space, to the government space, particular in the public advocate's office under Bill de Blasio, and was introduced to Zakiyah. I even in my past life applied to a job at AQE as a parent organizer. So we've been in this discussion and quest and experiment to justice for many moons. So if I'm going to be on any podcast, to be with Zakiyah,
Yes,
a very nice pairing, if you will.
I agree.
See, we had a feeling that the pairing made sense, and we suspected that you two knew each other quite well, but we did not know that, listeners. That's
a happy
we're
surprise,
learning
yeah.
this right now. Yeah. Mhm. So, and Sadye, you're actually getting into my first question, which is, we were going to ask you both to expand on your Twitter bios to let listeners know a little bit more about what you do, how long have you been doing it, and how is your work impacted by the Office of the Chancellor, so that we get a sense of your perspective. So, Sadye, if you want to pick that thread up, since you already started a little bit of your background, can you tell us a little bit more?
Yes, I'd love to. So thank you guys for having me on the show. I'm your biggest fan, or one of your biggest fans. So thank you for doing this.
Our one fan. You're the fan.
No.
One fan.
She was early. She was early on the radical bureaucrat train. So appreciate that.
Real recognize real. So just shout out to you guys for showing up in this way. And for making a creative, cool choice to show up in this way. I'm always here for innovation and making the movement fun and irresistible. So here we are.
Thank you.
I also get to work with you in my formal capacity too, so that's also fun. What's up, everybody? Campoamor, humble and excited guest this evening. Born in Central America, El Salvador, raised in New York City by a single mama in downtown Manhattan. Proud public school graduate, was often one of the only people of color in many of my classrooms. And so the imprint of segregation and racism is alive and well. I'm also a public school parent now. I have a kid in pre-K, and he is the reflection of the anti-racist world I wish to see. I identify as an anti-racist, a pro-Black anti-racist, a community organizer, a facilitator, and I do this work for my mama, and I do this work for my son. And my job as Director of Community Affairs, I have the privilege of working with people external to the DOE, students and community board members and parent leaders like Zakiyah, and advocates, a bunch of different beautiful folks who are not employed by the DOE, and I engage them as primary partners in educational transformation. And then the flip side is I work internally in the DOE to make sure that they value community engagement, that they value community voice, and that they understand that public policy works really well when you engage the public, and actually loop them in and let them guide the way because they know what's up. So lifelong learner and excited to be in this learning exchange with y'all. This work is as much personal to me as it is professional. So power of the people, happy to be here.
Thank you. Welcome, Sadye.
Yeah, thank you. I must say, I did not know about the podcast, but I will have to check it out and go back and listen to it. So thank you for having me on. Let me see, I'm trying to follow Sadye. I thought it was really good. Well done. So yeah, I born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. Raised at the age of 10 by a single mom. Previous to that was an abusive home where my father abused my mom. She got us out of there. My brother and I went to public school all the way up to high school, finished some college, CUNY, and then my husband, we met in high school, married, and we had 8 children. The baby is 20, will be 21, and the oldest will be 35. And now we have grandchildren in the public school system, and some that are one is too young to be there. I started as a parent leader with the Alliance for Quality Education, I think in 2000-ish, 2000, around the Campaign for Fiscal Equity work. And didn't know what organizing any of that was. Kind of fell into it in a powerful way. I think I was being lost in motherhood and wifehood, and it came at a perfect time of giving me something that now that my children are all grown, I'm not like clinging to them, like, why are you leaving your mother? I have my own thing there. Now they're always like, Mom, where are you going? Where are you flying to now? Where are you going to be? You know, this is pre-COVID. And AQE is the leading statewide advocacy group, right? And we're 21 years old. I've been doing this work for about 21 years this year as well. And we were started as an advocacy piece of the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. Here we are 14 years in, almost 15 years in, and we still have yet to create equity in public schools or fully fund the Campaign for Fiscal Equity lawsuit. And so that has been our mission and journey. We organize with parents, young people, community members, and educators across New York State, not just New York City. Not an easy task, but one that is definitely needed. And if we were not around, there's no doubt, it's not about tooting a horn, it's just reality. There would be much more cuts to education than we have already seen. And now we are in hype mode during COVID because we've had to organize on all levels of government, not just city and state, it's been federal as well. But we're up for the task. We have a new ED, Jasmine Gripper. So we are all femme organization as well as led by a Black woman. Super exciting. And we've been doing some really phenomenal work, and I don't think it'll stop. But yeah, this is a tough time right now. As we currently right now, as we sit 4 weeks into budget season left, and we really need to tax the wealthy so we can fund our schools and so much more.
Say it.
Yeah. And I want to say again, I mean, for people who are in the world of education, activism in New York, like Sadye and Zakiyah are well-known folks. So again, it's an honor to have you both on.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, Zakiyah mentioned the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, CFE, such an incredible story. And I think when I came to New York City in 2015, you know, the Campaign for Fiscal Equity and the people organizing around demanding that this money that we already won, you know, like get paid, was some of the kind of North Star for me of understanding, like, you know, there's a lot of different forces at play in New York City. And, you know, here's a group of parents, right? Here's a large group of parents who are organizing and demanding and winning for the kids. And so, yeah, so excited about today. So I want to give a tiny bit of context for the chancellor kind of world. And I was talking with a colleague, I think yesterday, and we realized, oh yeah, there hasn't even been a chancellor for that long. Actually, there's only been a handful of chancellors at all. And so in some ways, the role of chancellor is one that's still being defined by whoever holds it. And so when we're talking about Chancellor Richard Carranza, it's important to note that in some ways he was never, quote unquote, supposed to be chancellor, right? Bill de Blasio, the Italian-American, Brooklyn-based incoming mayor of New York City, chose Carmen Farina. Right, Carmen Farina, who is the child of Castellano, Spanish immigrants from Brooklyn, and spent her entire career spanning 50 years in the system, her entire 50-year career in New York City. Chancellor Farina announced that she would be retiring in March of 2018. And then this crazy, what many people call a huge blunder, right? One of the strangest political blunders in the history of the city happened. On the 28th of February, the city announced that the new chancellor would be Alberto M. Carvalho, a well-known Portuguese-American superintendent from Miami-Dade County. Here's a brief description from the New York Times about what happened next. Then, in less than 24 hours, triumph turned to embarrassment when the official, Alberto M. Carvalho, abruptly, even impulsively in his own telling, changed his mind and renounced the job during a dramatic spectacle broadcast live on television Thursday. Mr. Carvalho, the superintendent of Miami-Dade County Public Schools, made his announcement before his school board in Miami, leading to cheers in the packed meeting room and fury and confusion in New York City. I'm breaking an agreement, Mr. Carvalho said. I shall remain in Miami-Dade as your superintendent. His words came during a special board meeting that turned into a 3.5-hour exhibition of supporters begging him to stay.
Yeah, that was crazy. And anyone who was here at that time remembers that. It was like, we have a chancellor. No, we don't.
No, we don't.
And it all happened.
I remember that we stayed in room 314, which is the press room in the DOE that day, and we were all watching the TVs. Then, like, either later in the day, I got called into I think it's 320, the like chancellor's room, and so we were all in there. And then Chancellor Badinha walks back in, and I think I started to chant 4 more years. I'm just like, anyway, it was a very funny moment, but she was like, absolutely not. Like, no,
right.
Not
yeah, I've done my time. You know, I'm in Harlem and I have a dirt bike gang outside, as you might hear. So it's real here.
Part of life in the city.
Yeah.
I'm pro dirt bike gang. If anybody wants to come at me on Twitter for that.
All right. So anyway, that was, it was a crazy time. And so what happened next was a week later, Richard Carranza, a Chicanx former ESL student from Tucson, Arizona, who came up in the Tucson City School District, built the mariachi program there, then served as the deputy superintendent for instruction, innovation, and social justice in San Francisco, served as superintendent of Houston Independent Schools District in Texas. He was named Chancellor for New York City Public Schools in what appeared to be a somewhat hasty decision. It was just about a week afterwards, right? And so let's get right to it. We want to ask you two, how has this chancellor impacted the school system from your vantage point? Either one of you can start, so take it away.
I can start, Sadie, if you want.
Okay.
So, you know, I've been doing this work 20 plus years. I've been through a lot of different chancellors, not so many mayors because one stole a couple of terms, a term or so. And under a mayor that put in a billionaire magazine exec and thought that was a good idea to run a system of, you know, Black and brown kids.
That didn't last too long.
Yeah,
95 days.
It's not even that it didn't last, it's that you had the audacity. Like, what does that say about how you feel about children and community members? That you had to get a lawyer to get a waiver to be the chancellor, who was just horrible, right? And then you
that was our prior mayor, Michael Bloomberg.
Yeah, Bloomberg, sorry, yeah. And he had Joe Klein, lawyer, had to get a waiver. Bloomberg put in what's her name? Kathy Black.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis Walcott, who was horrible too, sorry. And didn't do right by our schools, right? Who thought it was cute to be cooking waffles with the pre-K in Tweed, right? It was just bad. And so my experience and what I share right now comes from that, from understanding what it really looked like to have chancellors who didn't care about kids, a mayor who really didn't care about kids, right? And who put people in place inside of that building who didn't do everything they could to protect children. So here comes, and Chancellor Farina, you know, we had, when she was a deputy chancellor way back, that's when I first started getting involved in education. So it's where we came full circle, right? I had issues with her too, right? I think she cared about kids. I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that she cared about education either. I just don't think that the vision that she had was the vision that Black and brown parents had. So here we have a mayor who was thrust into the largest system in the country, education urban system in the country. And And the first thing he did was listen to the parents of the Coalition for Educational Justice and ensure that there was $23 million put in implicit bias training for educators. We didn't think that was going to happen. We thought it was going to be a much longer battle. It was 18 months, but it was less under him, right? It was 18 months when Chancellor Carranza got in, way less than when he got in, right? He got hit right away with white parents on the Upper East Side or West Side, wherever it was, that didn't like what he said. And he did not back down. And that was when we knew that we had somebody real. And he had never backed down from challenging people who when he pushed for integration, to end segregation, to end these racist policies of the specialized high school exam or the gifted and talented. I'm not here to debate anybody. So if anyone's listening to this podcast, they want to debate, I'm not debating that. That is what I know and that is what I believe. You don't have to believe that, right? But what I do know is that he stood against all of those things at all odds. He was willing to take the shots so that the folks that he put inside internally could do the work. There's not many people out here who lead like that. I don't know a lot of people that lead like that, who are willing to take the shots and still stand in their dignity and challenge it in the midst of being called all kind of xenophobic, racist things. He was willing to take the shots. And who knew he had lost 11 family members and friends to this devastating virus, right? And had to deal with mayoral control under a mayor. These are my words, not Sadie's, under a mayor, right? Who I don't care, I don't think has a strong enough backbone to stand up against anything or anybody. So how do you work in a system like that? And if your core, if your heart is in this work for Black and brown children and communities, which we know if they're doing well, everyone will do well. All children will do well. It doesn't mean that some will not. It means that we will all do well.
Correct.
If you're willing to stand up in those things and you have a boss who is holding you, handcuffing you from doing what's right by kids, at some point there's a breaking point and you go, I gotta move on and I'm dealing with trauma and this is not healthy for me and or my family. And so did he do everything right? Absolutely not. Was it perfect? No. Could have been things been done better? Absolutely. But I'm here to tell you, after 20 years of, or a little less than that, under 12 years under Bloomberg and all that was there, let me tell you, this man had the heart. He cared about our kids. And we all know, and I end with this, that the hardest thing is to get people to care and be from the place where some of these kids were to do this work. And he had that. The other piece was easier, I think, if the mayor had allowed him to do what he needed to do.
Yeah. Well, my role when the chancellor became the chancellor. So just, in 2014, I worked for Mayor Bill de Blasio from 2009, actually, as a volunteer, but then joined his public advocate's office, worked for him as he, through his mayoral race on the government side, but became his special assistant, and then basically worked inauguration and then joined Chancellor Farinha as her special assistant on her first Monday in office as chancellor. So I worked very closely with both of these, with both of them. When Chancellor Carranza came in, I was already the director of community affairs, so was tasked with his public engagement plan and how he would meet the people and listen to the people. And the first thing that he really insisted on doing was listening to students and to school communities. That's a shift. Mm-hmm. And also that's my love language is listening to communities. Mm-hmm. This work is not for the faint of heart. Parents are dealing with a lot. Students are dealing with a lot. Teachers, like every single aspect, people who serve food to our young people, like every single part of this system, 150,000 employees, 1.1 million students. We serve nearly 1 million meals a day. We're like, the biggest municipality in the nation. Any constituency you go to, whether you're talking to internal folks or external folks, like it's just a lot to hold. And as a leader, anyone who has the capacity, the blood for it, the spirit of listening to people, absorbing their experiences, which are sometimes difficult, and then wanting to take it into action and being like, okay, team, we heard this, let's let's do different. Let's experiment towards a different way. Let's hear a different thing. So that's what he wanted to do. And that, as I said, is a love language of mine. So I had a lot of respect for that. I met him. I met him as like, I was picking him up as a staffer, and like we were just walking right into an event. It was his second week on the job, and I built an event, not alone, with a team of wonderful people, in Sunset Park. That was like a New York City Mexican welcome. And it was like hundreds of families, a lot of monolingual Spanish-speaking families, but not only, but a lot of monolingual Spanish-speaking families who were really, getting involved in PTAs and parent leadership for the first time. And they certainly were working with me on District 15 diversity plan at the time. And so it was really awesome to see how he, from off the bat, embraced his culture in a way, showed up as a man of color, centered by way of how he spent his time. Students, monolingual Spanish-speaking families in Sunset Park, families who work with the organization MASA. He was there in the South Bronx, and they don't just speak Spanish, they speak other indigenous languages as well. Like, this was how he showed up, and he wanted to hit the ground running. And so we were working really hard together, and the man said, thank you. And the man said, good work. And any public servant knows, like, you just don't get that much. And that's the whole, like, it's the type of cape we wear. It's a special type of masochism. We don't get a lot of thank yous. And he just always said thank you, or he said good work, Sadie, after an event. He really cared about the people. Like, the event was not about me, but like as we would walk out or as he would get into his car and move to the next thing. So I guess I would just say, like, my impression was from the beginning, he was a principled leader. He had a set of values that centered people. And when you're in education, that's probably a good thing. He was a person of color and a proud person of color. As I mentioned, I'm from El Salvador, a country that was never named when I grew up in school. So, not being seen as people of color in certainly in white spaces, but just like in general it's a powerful shift to feel like, wow, he's a Mexican man. He's a proud Mexican man. He sees, we're not from the same background, but he really, it's not that he needs to try on an equity hat or perform an equity or let me try to be an ally. It's like, no, he's a man of color in America.
Yeah, I remember at several meetings for a period of months, I think this was not too long after the listening tour, he would start every public appearance with like 30 seconds in Spanish. And he would just introduce himself in Spanish. So Richard, whatever, he would say all this stuff. And basically what he would say in Spanish is that when I was a student and I showed up to school, I didn't understand what anyone was saying because they were talking this language I didn't know. And then afterwards he would translate what he just said. Yeah, what I just told you was that, what you just felt, and I watched it a few times and it was so effective. People were kind of stunned and uncomfortable and disoriented, like, what is he doing? Why is he? And then he would change to English and he'd explain it, and there was kind of, it had a powerful effect, I think. And I think certainly the kind of ways in which he I want to say acted, but like played the role, right? Did sort of symbolic moments like that, I think was an important part of the decisions that he made. So I want to, I don't know, I don't want to like bash.
I want to stay on this for a little bit before we go to the other side of things. Yeah, let's stay with, like, because there was a lot there. And I'm remembering one of the things Zakiyah mentioned, how he spoke to integration and segregation. And people who were in that will remember well that up until 2017, our former chancellor and our mayor refused to utter the words integration or segregation. And they put out a plan for diversity in New York City public schools. And it was something like a 14-page plan, and it only used the word diversity. It would not say integration or segregation. And so his first press conference, I believe he started talking about it because he was already out there listening and had already heard from people who were coming to him and saying, hey, this is one of the most segregated school systems in the country.
And he heard it from students. I mean, not exclusively from students, but understand that he didn't make this up. He didn't come in with an agenda. I believe that he's a man of color and therefore maybe has some principles towards social justice, but that's not what he came in. He heard this everywhere he went.
Mhm.
Our schools are segregated from young people.
Mhm.
When you're new to any city, but also just like in general, if you're human and you hear students say, in my high school, I don't have these sports. In my school down the block, they have this. I mean, very plain, plain facts, clear experiences. There was no way, and hundreds of people, hundreds. So this was not made up, and he respected the students and the people that he heard from enough to lift up their voice and say, absolutely, this is what I'm seeing and this is what I'm hearing, and we have to do something about it.
Yeah, and he did it right from jump. I mean, when he did it the first time, I kind of laughed. I was like, oh, he didn't get the memo. He's not supposed to say that. But he did it anyway. Maybe he knew he wasn't supposed to, or maybe he didn't. Maybe he didn't care. But he said it, and he continued to say it. And I'm wondering, Sadye and Zakiyah, both from your perspective, part of what we've been talking about so far is just the impact of his language and the way he showed up, and it says a lot about who he is as a person. But I'm also wondering if you could talk about, like, what's the practical difference that makes. That the fact that he uses certain words or shows up in a certain way, like what difference does that make to the work that you do? Because I think it makes a real difference, and people want to always know about policy. Well, what policy did he change? And as Zakiyah said earlier, I mean, we can talk about all the ways in which he was. We weren't always in the, or I was never in the room with him when the policies were getting hashed out. But we know that a lot of times his hands were tied. Because of the way that we have mayoral control, right? And he's not the head policymaker for the system. And yet he did have this impact. And a lot of it was through his language and the way he presented himself. So can you both talk about that?
Yeah, so I can talk to it directly in that I have had the pleasure and privilege of working on some school diversity issues, been a part of its journey through the Department of Education, and was one of those people who was advised as a public speaker for the department, was advised to stay with the words diversity and equity and inclusion, to stay away from words like anti-racism, institutional racism, integration or segregation or desegregation, for a lot of different reasons. But I think in essence, because it's just very complicated and there was no policy solution and a lot of different things. But so it made the job very difficult, as you can imagine, in certain communities when they'd ask, like, no, we don't want just diversity, we want meaningfully integrated schools. And I'd be like, good point. Say more.
Right.
And it was April 2nd, I believe, was the Chancellor Carranza's first day, 2018. And when he was able to say that, that enabled me in the D15 diversity plans working group meetings, in the public workshops, in the other community conversations that I was leading or facilitating, to open up to be myself. And I'll just speak really quickly that, for me, anti-racism is a proactive role, but it's really being able to be seen in your fullness and be able to be authentic and to be able to be celebrated in all your expressions. Anti-racism for me, and I know for Chancellor Carranza, is an umbrella term. It doesn't mean we're ableist or we're not expansive in our trans community. It's really a term, again, an umbrella term that says we're proactively against systems and policies that privilege some over others.
Yep.
And it's not a neutral term, and that's a call to action, and that was something that he was very proud about, and that's something that I'm also personally, really proud about. And so part of that for me and how that showed up was I, as a staffer and a Department of Education official, was able to bring more myself to communities in these conversations, and that makes space for other people to also bring themselves and also deepen the conversation. And so not only was the language, did it earn us as a department some, like, well, okay, finally they're naming something really important. You can't heal it if you don't deal with it, or something, whatever the rhyme is.
Yeah.
So, you know, and people in the community with whom I work and with whom I serve, they were like, oh, wow, Sadye can be like a little more authentic or a little bit more open, or, you know, it seems like she's really sort of leaning in, and that makes a difference. So like his effect was not, it didn't just stop with him. It actually made space for staffers and other public servants to show up differently, and I think better serve the people.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say, you know, just the way Abram talked about how he opened meetings, right? It allowed to allow somebody, a group of folks, to be seen who to speak in your native tongue in a country that tells you and has done so much harm, to get people to just be something they're not, be American, talk English, you know, to make it okay and to do it in such dignity, you know, for parents to experience that, as well as to make it a teachable moment for others, right? So you then translate it and other folks are like, oh yeah, that did feel uncomfortable. Yeah, that did, you know, I wasn't sure what was happening. Oh, is that how people feel sometimes? Oh, that's not a good feeling, right? And it's something as small as that, that might not even being caught by a lot of people. It's really powerful, right? A way to just come into a space. He was very vocal around the Campaign for Fiscal Equity dollars and inequity that the state, and speaking out and testifying about that we need state funding in order to do a lot of these things. Even moving to the state level, because he knew there needed to be state action around the specialized high school exams, right? Like not being afraid to challenge those structures and to bring community into the space, those who have been working on it, to organize, you know, young people who were you know, saying that it's keeping me out of that space, right? It's not an equitable space, to create an equity for all agenda, to put actual folks who are longtime educators, diverse group, you know, Black women, Asian, Latinx, like men, you know, like all those people in spaces. And these are folks, you know, like the Paul Forbes of the world, and the Rubies and the LaShawns and the Flavias, like, and people I'm not naming, right, that who are doing that work. That matters, right? It allows you then as a leader to go out and do some of the other stuff while the work gets done, right? And I don't think we can underestimate that enough. And then I think also just him, you know, engaging with his mariachi band, and not even saying I love mariachi and like, oh, it's so exciting, but to pull out your instrument and be like, yo, I'm not just playing, I'm playing. You know what I mean? Like, I know how to play this, and the history of it and where it comes from. I just remember, you know, Make the Road, groups of parent leaders from Make the Road, just the pride and excitement about the party in the street of having a chancellor like playing mariachi, what that must have felt like and what that meant, you know. And I think it's things like that you can't underestimate, but you also have to understand that in a system in white supremacy, when other folks see that, it becomes gaslighting, it becomes like all these things, it becomes a tax, and which is what he experienced, right? From the right or others who just thought he's trying to take something from me. If we go back in history, we'll realize that that's always what happens, right? When we have a leader who looks like us, can relate to us, then the people who they can't relate to think that means somebody's trying to take something from me, and so therefore I must attack it, you know. And so I think we can underestimate the power of that. I won't call it a journal, I won't call it a newspaper, but the rag, the Post, you know, it just came after him, and parents, white and Asian parents, were like calling him really horrible names. But he was the first one out there when that crazy man who was in the White House was saying really horrible, xenophobic, racist things. He was out there like, let's go, you know, eat in Chinatown. Let's go, you know, speaking out against that, right? That's a sign of a leader, right? Who cares about all of us, not just some of us. And I think we miss that because of some of the other things that kind of rise up.
I think you kind of alluded to it a little bit, and I agree wholeheartedly with what you guys are saying. But I wonder if there are some specific places where you wish that we would have been a little more effective at kind of getting past those barriers. Like we're not that we're looking to kind of like run a tally or say what Carranza didn't do enough of or whatever, but like, are there some specific areas where you guys have seen like, man, like we really didn't make enough progress here, and like, you know, we whatever the reasons are, I wonder if you know or think about or have theories about what the reasons are. But where are some of the kind of like, oh, you know, it would have been great if we could have done this while Carranza was here.
I mean, I think what I've heard, and if people believe that, then they feel that, then that's not okay, right? Rather the intention was there or not, which is one, like educators didn't feel like they've been listened to, especially under COVID, right? Like I think pre-COVID, he might have, you know, gotten, you know, been given a break on some things, but in this moment of COVID, like people, raw emotions, fear, right? And educators not feeling like they were listened to around the school reopening, really, and they were not really engaged in those conversations. Parents the same way, right? Like we knew, like we don't want to, we're afraid, we're this, we're that, like we don't know what's happening, and you did not engage us in those conversations, right? The reality is this is what people feel, those most impacted, the consumers of the product that you're putting out, then that cannot be invalidated, right? It has to be validated. And so I think, you know, all those things are real. Young people who didn't think he was moving quick enough on integration work, right? You know, so I think all those things are real. And could they have been done better? And yeah, they probably could have, absolutely. And I do think that also in that process that, once again, mayoral control plays a role in that. When you have an agenda that you really want to move forward, but your boss is like, oh, maybe not now, wait a minute on this, or don't say this too loud. So yes.
I mean, the reality with a lot of these things is that there are very hyper pressurized, multiple people pulling in the opposite direction. You mentioned like teachers going back to school. Just the high number of like union and mayoral level kind of conversations that are happening around that. How much does the chancellor really able, you know, like, now, could he have done something? You know, that's where I think, sure, yeah, like something could have been done. It would have been better if something had been done. But, you know, this is kind of what happened. I would say, do you look like you were about to say something, I think.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think it's really important to reflect on growth areas like for ourselves and for a system and as a team of people. One of which I was a proud team member of his, and I stood by, you know, like I'm a very proud team member, which means that this is a growth area for me. I think, and especially now, given the high rate of anti-Asian racism that we are seeing as a result of 45 having the nerve and audacity and disgusting moral judgment to call it a China virus, right? Like I put that in quotes. It's absolutely, you know, disgusting beyond what my wildest dreams. Even before that, though, as a proud Indigenous person, as you heard I say, I'm pro-Black. Right? I have a big community of people of color who are at my birthday parties, who are at my family dinner, right? Like this is my family are people of color. And I'll say, as a growth area, how do we, as Black and Brown, which already has a lot there, become more expansive with our Asian community, who, by the way, is like 49 different nations are under the term Asian. Lots of linguistic diversity, lots of all types of different backgrounds, ethnicities, heritage, like all the things I'm sitting with. And that's why I'm trying to be, you know, vulnerable and say, I think this is a growth area and a calling for me as a person going forward is like, how do I show up, you know, as a pro-Asian anti-racist? How do we as Black and Brown people keep building on our own bridges and colorism and all the things that are wrapped up in race and racism, but make space for our Asian brothers and sisters and people to enter the discussion as well.
Right.
Yes. Keep sitting. We're the super majority. We are the super majority in New York City. We're the super majority, and the super majority of people want music in their classrooms. They want art classes. They want equity. They want some diversity. They want some sense of gym and freedom and dance. Like the super majority of families in New York City want the same thing for their kids. And so I think about Fred Hampton is you don't fight racism with racism, you fight it with solidarity. And so as a growth area and as radical bureaucrats, I wonder how we, Abram and Sam and Zakiyah, how do we show up differently in that space? What shifts do we need to make to keep building in that way? So that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the tensions around the exam schools and exam seats, right? And the ways in which that touches on a very core kind of strategy that a lot of our families in New York City who are coming here to educate their children as New Yorkers, right? They have these expectations, right? And within that was kind of the seed for this, like, oh man, we have a lot of work to do because we're not really in solidarity. We don't see, I mean, certainly seeing it as a like land grab for good seats, that's not solidarity. But on top of that, when we can easily be played against each other, right? And like, you know, if something like that can be used, you know, then we have work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So the flip side of this announcement is that Misha Ross Porter, a graduate of Queens Vocational and Technical High School, who's a founding staff member at Urban Assembly's first school, has had an incredible career fighting for our students and has worked within the DOE for, I think, over 20 years now, has now been named the new chancellor, the incoming chancellor. So this is really exciting news. What can you both tell us about what to expect from Chancellor Porter? Chancellor Ross Porter? I don't know.
Do you know? Does she have a preference? Do we know? Maybe we should start with Chancellor Ross Porter and let her say Chancellor Porter.
Okay. Yeah.
We're pointing at each other. Chancellor Ross Porter, Misha. I'm going to call her Misha for now because that's how I know her. But certainly when she becomes chancellor, I'll probably like hear that mom voice in my head and just call her chancellor all the time, like I did with Chancellor Carranza. So she and I worked together with young people on developing a facilitation guide for the school diversity advisory groups youth symposium that they did on school diversity and integration, and the town halls that the school diversity advisory group commissioned or said that they wanted to do, but the DOE was operationalizing it. I would say the DOE event organizer. I did not work alone, but I was sort of the coordinator for all of those events. We did 8 that year, which was spring of 2018, and another 2 in 2019. But I worked with her again, shoulder to shoulder, talking about what should we call this, what should we name this, and those are important memories because that's like the work. The work is you're in the meeting with your pens out, talking about this, oh no, I think that. Like Zakiyah and I have done parent conferences together, have planned agenda together. Like it's just like that's the work. And so the good news is she's about, you know, there's this life, right? I mean, how many water bottles have we all carried and nappy? Like we just do everything that needs to happen in order for the big stuff to happen. So she's about that. But she also is a principled leader and was one of the first folks I saw that really modeled as a woman and a woman of color that you can be equal parts, like as serious as a heart attack and warm and inviting. And that's not a model of leadership that I've personally had very much with people who are in power.
That resonates a ton with me. The times that I've interacted with Misha, and she's asked me to call her Misha, and I can never do that with superintendents. It always feels funny to call people that by their first name when they're like the embodiment of power or whatever. But she was, you know, so friendly. Like I was like, why are you being nice to me? I don't like you're, and it's so contrary to the culture in the public sector and in the DOE specifically. of a very kind of hierarchical and siloed existence, you know, Shad. So that really resonated with me a lot. Thanks, Sadie.
Yeah, I guess I would. I have met her because we've worked with Community School 55 for a number of years, going to Albany and like around the state stuff. And I know when they've had events there, she's been there. I'm not sure. Was she the superintendent at Jamal School too? Casa Middle School? I think that's 11.
I thought that was true. You could be right.
I don't know. I don't know that to be true. So I'm gonna let it go and I'm gonna keep it moving. Just to say, but our partner groups that we work with all the time, New Settlement Parent Action Committee in the Bronx. I'm actually just coming off of a Coalition for Educational Justice organizing meeting, and they were just talking about her and how you know, for the Healing Center schools work that they're doing. How crucial she was in making sure that parents and students sat on those committees, even though everybody wasn't all in and excited about that. Like, that's the reason that there are parents and students engaged in those conversations, and part of that whole work around Healing Center schools in the Bronx, and just tons of just praise from parents and community members. And to me, that's the go-to, right? If parents and community members on the ground, and if you got young people too, that's a good trifecta right there. I think educators as well, but definitely for me, it's those folks, like as parents, community members, and students. If they're all in on somebody, I think they've really put they did the work in the community to build that trust, and I think that's really powerful. But we also know, as I tweeted out, that if they came after Chancellor Carranza, they are definitely coming after the first Black woman chancellor in New York City, and we've already begun to see that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's important to note that this has not been reported publicly, so I don't know how she was chosen, but I feel like Chancellor Carranza must have had something to do with it. And if he did, you know, that's part of his legacy too, right? The first Black woman chancellor, and somebody coming straight out of the Bronx. You know, which is a borough that is constantly underrepresented in proportion to its need in city politics. So
yeah, under everything, under-resourced, undervalued, you know, I think it says a lot to have a chancellor who was principal superintendent, executive superintendent in the Bronx. I think it, you know, if you know New York City, you know, there's a lot of different kinds of feelings across the boroughs. People like to kind of like stump for their boroughs and trash the other boroughs. But, you know, the South Bronx remains the poorest congressional district in the country, right? We know looking at all measures of school quality that the schools in the Bronx are struggling. That's why charter schools have such a foothold in the Bronx. The Bronx is one of the first places in America where the charter school idea popped up, because the schools in the Bronx were so bad. And so within that, to me, I see Misha as somebody who can be very real and pragmatic about the realities on the ground. This is not a like, you know, I can think of a few leaders, chancellors and deputy chancellors, who were very kind of academic and theoretical, right? And there were some nice diagrams that were available, right? But I think there'll be some of that too. You know, I'm not, you know, I think Misha is a very strategic, you know, you look at the Bronx plan in the last several years and everything that's happened, you know, clearly there's some good evidence, right? That Misha is a strong leader, but I think she's gonna have that very kind of visceral, experiential knowledge of like what it means to be in a school, right, under these kinds of circumstances. And that's why the chancellor spends so much of their time going from school to school, because it's very important to us that we imagine the leader be someone that kind of goes down with the people and like sees things, right? Well, Misha's already done that, right? She's seen and experienced a bunch. And so I think that's going to make a difference. My take. So what do you think, Sam? What's your take on the new chancellor? You're not going to get off the hook that easy.
Oh, I've been in a couple meetings with her, and they were meetings that were kind of informal gatherings of progressive people within the system that she showed up for, and she didn't have to be there. And so if you show your face at some of these meetings that I'm talking about, I respect you right off the bat, because it's after work. It's with very cool people, and but they're not. They were not places where
They're not going to pull any punches.
Yeah,
They're not pulling any
we're going to pull
punches.
punches, but also it wasn't a place for grandstanding. She wasn't showing
Right.
up to politic.
Right.
She was showing up because she wanted to be part of the conversation. So between that and all the positive impressions that I know other people have of her, people who I respect, I think it's very exciting. So we just want to end by asking if either of you want to say anything else, any final words, including anything you want to plug. So any last thoughts?
I'm ready for the tell-all book, Sadie.
Yeah, yeah, right. When's it coming out? But and when you close out, please include your Twitter handles in there if you want a Twitter follow out there. So, Zakiyah, we're going to go first with you this time because you kept letting Sadie go first. So, Zakiyah, any final thoughts?
Yeah. The next few months, we need to be. There's nothing wrong with protecting something to allow it to happen. It doesn't mean you're not holding folks accountable. And the work of Misha Porter, for her to be able to hit the ground running, is going to be the need for all of us who care about equity, who care about children, and who believe in her to protect her. And when I say that, I mean when they come in the press or the language gets, where we know that what they're really saying, what they're trying to say, everybody needs to come out and say this is unacceptable. And we need to make sure that she's able to do a job while also understanding that advocates will still not be giving a second or a break for anything, especially since she knows the system. We're going to be on her saying, we still want culturally responsive education right now. We don't want testing in our schools, right? So we already had the current Chancellor Carranza talking about opt out. That's a whole nother thing we didn't get a chance to talk about. Kudos to him for saying I would if I was a parent, right? While he still is in there for a few more days. And that in order for us to, not knowing what's going to happen, election candidates, if she will even be the next chancellor moving forward into after this, all the elections, mayoral elections, et cetera, and city council, that we need to make sure that there's an agenda out there. So we are part of New Yorkers for Racially Just Public Schools. So go to our website. I think I want to say it's educationforliberation.org, but we will share it with both of you also. You can share with others. The goal of it is to create a racial justice agendas for education for any candidate. It's not to choose who's going to be mayor or city council or any office. It is to let those candidates know that they are a group of powerful organizations, a couple of dozen organizations who have been doing this work for decades, some for a few years, youth groups, parent-led groups, community groups, CECs, ECC, all those things. Like these are the core group of folks that if you really want to run for something, this is the agenda you need to be pushing forward. On the statewide level, we're in the midst of the budget fight. We have 4 weeks left. There's an Invest in Our New York Act that we are trying to get every elected official to support. We have lots of senators and assembly members in support of it now, but there's far too many that are not. 6 bills could raise up to $50 billion with a B dollars to close a $30 billion gap, and as well as truly invest in housing, education, healthcare, and a whole host of other things that really will lift all boats. We can end homelessness. We can do so much for our city if we were willing to get rid of the scarcity mindset and not think that we cannot do this. We can collectively do this. We have a supermajority. There's no reason we can't. So we need all your listeners out there. Call your assembly member, call your state senator and say, support the Invest in Our New York Act. It's time to really protect students, not billionaires. It's time to protect people in homelessness. It's time for us to find our moral center, because if budgets are a moral document, we've been doing really horrible over the last few years, especially under this governor. We have been building budgets off the back of Black and brown folks. And during this pandemic, they are the ones that have kept this city going. And so we're not willing to protect them in this moment. I'm not sure when we will be able to. So we need them to be bold and courageous, but they only will be if your constituents are putting them on the line and on the hook for bringing home those dollars. Oh, and Zakiyah, Ansari, ZANSARI 8 is my Twitter handle. So please follow me, and it's AQE_NY. Please follow us. go to our website, sign up to get emails. We're constantly having online actions, in-person actions, anything we need to do. Can't stop, won't stop.
Awesome.
100% applaud Zakiyah for everything she does and for how you show up. This was a real treat to be on this podcast, but on this podcast with you, I always look to you.
Appreciate you, Sadye, a whole bunch.
Big time, you know, like we really show up for one another, and from different sides of the different ways, different shapes, not different sides, like opposite sides, just different places. And so it's important as radical bureaucrats that we all like see there's all types of different creative ways where we can show up and make our voice heard. As I said, I'm a public school parent. I'm a parent of a young brown kid. I'm a parent of a brown kid who is staying remote this year because we're in an intergenerational home. We know that brown children or students of color this year are staying home 4 times more likely and doing all remote than their white counterparts. We know about the academic learning loss. Misha knows about this from her own lived experience, from her professional experience. We expect and hope that she will utilize the experiences of the supermajority of families, lift up the data to support and to prove over and over again the things that we're saying, so that we can shift our department's priorities to, again, support the supermajority of students. Academic learning loss is at the top of almost every parent I know's mind, even students' mind, teachers' mind, my own mind. And so hoping that we continue to connect the conversation between integration as an effective intervention tool that will create more equitable and excellent outcomes for our young people. Connecting those conversations so it's no longer equity versus excellence, that spoiler alert, you can't have one without the other. Building upon the Chancellor's legacy, and I know it's a little dramatic to say legacy because he's still very much with us, but building on the legacy of using their language to connect the dots between academic learning loss and really trying to do 5R real integration, and not gotta handle COVID and then. We can't, the super majority of our families and our students cannot afford that kind of discussion any longer. It is both, and that is the social emotional work, that is the healing centered schools that Zakiyah is talking about, that is of course equitable funding in early childhood, it's all the things. But I am lifting up integration specifically as an academic intervention to address the learning loss that we know we are going to deal with in this moment, right? So not to wait. The urgency for me is immediate and present, and even in my home. So I'll just leave it like his biggest legacy is us. Parents and radical bureaucrats working together to keep the system really in service of, again, the super majority of students and families.
Wow, so much to go through. Thank you guys so much. And I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for persevering in the work that you do. I know that, as Sadye mentioned earlier, sometimes it can feel thankless, it can feel all sorts of ways. But me personally, I look to really both of you, largely through social media, but like I really look to your leadership, and I think that that's important. It is important that we, give our roses, right? While you're still here. So thank you for coming on the podcast, and thank you for being who you are.
Absolutely. I mean, Abram said it great. But I will add that I've told Sadye before, when Sadie's train gets going, I'm jumping on the Sadye train. So thank you for your leadership, Sadye, and Zakiyah as well. Again, usually from a distance, but educationforliberation.org is the website. And those campaigns, we heard you. So we're going to look that up, and listeners, make sure you do as well. So thank you. So Abram, we got to wrap up like good bureaucrats, right?
We've got to wrap up. We'll give a little bit of music as we say goodbye to Sadye and Zakiyah. Thank you guys so much.
Bota o recombo no congado, Brasil, 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 pra mim. Deixa cantar de novo trovador. a merencória luz da luz.
Well, we're pretty busy these days at the Radical Bureaucrat. Between the global pandemic and our own personal journeys and families, we'll be back soon with more. In the meantime, you can help us out by listening to the old ones and by following the podcast and leaving us a review on the Apple Podcasts app in particular. It's really the best way for small podcasts to reach new users. Also, check out radicalbureaucrat.com. It's misspelled in my script. Also, check out radicalbureaucrat.com for show notes and more.
You better know how to spell bureaucrat. But we're going to end by being good bureaucrats. The views expressed here are our personal opinions and do not reflect the official or unofficial position of any government agency, policy, party, leader, or really anyone besides the two of us, and maybe you, but maybe not. This content has not been sponsored or approved by anyone and was mostly just made because we wanted an opportunity to talk about things that matter to everyone, whether they realize it or not. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everyone.
Brasil, 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 pra mim.